So James, we're really privileged to have two of the top macro strategists and economists in the game. So just briefly, we've got Gerard Minack, who was ex-head of global asset strategy worldwide for Morgan Stanley. People call him the perma bear, but I actually call him the perma realist. He's very realistic about his calls, and I think the bear call's a little unfair. And then on top of that, we've got Steve Roberts, who was the chief economist at Nomura. Prior to that, he was chief economist at Swiss Bank and also UBS. Those two guys form the macro view for our investment analysts, the other 8 or 9 of us, to make our stock selections on the back of their macro. So that's explaining how it works. We're really privileged to have those guys on board. So what are they saying? And they've been extremely accurate over the last 2 years, 18 months. The big calls have been Aussie dollar down when most people a year and a half ago were calling it up. So we skewed our investment selection to that, and we mentioned that at the last briefing we had, so no point to go into that in detail, but it's worked very well for us. The other big call was continue to believe that there is growth in both North and Southern Asia. And although there has been a bit of a speed bump on the road for Chinese growth, we've looked through that, and Stephen Roberts' call of a GDP number out of China closer to 8 would have been scoffed at 6 months ago when he was making that call. Interestingly, we're seeing in the latest set of GDP figures coming through out of China that number is probably going to be very close to 8%, 7.8 to 8%. In addition to that, you're seeing very strong PMI data coming back into China. So for people that don't know PMI, that's the manufacturing data coming out of China. So we're maintaining our theme to those two things especially. So companies that benefit from foreign earnings, Australian companies benefiting from foreign earnings, and then also Australian companies that have a very good exposure to the Asian growth scenario. And there's some very obvious ones around that happy to talk about in a minute. We are, and I think if you think about it logically, a lot's been said about it. You're moving from an economy that's been really building things, it's been on a structural boom. That is waning to a degree, but it's not disappearing altogether. You look at what the Chinese authorities did recently. They decided to be specific about reducing interest rates, but they did it in the rural areas because they could see that things were slowing down in the rural areas. Now that's had a big boost in the short term to rural development in China. You've also had people migrating into the cities still. On top of that, you've seen some of the other things that they announced back in May, which was we're going to build railways out to cultural points of significance. So some beautiful lakes, taking people out to the mountains and so forth, and to the Great Wall. This has been a reaction that I think is seeing a lot of steel being used in terms of 400 billion, worth of railway developments, for instance, and they're fast tracking it. They do this so much quicker than we do in Australia. So I think that's been a really important point to see that we can look through some of the short-term fears about what's happening in China, and I think people don't really understand the ability of the Chinese government and the authorities to actually make things happen. It's not a Western democracy. Everything's not up for debate like it is in our country. It doesn't take 4 years to decide to build a bridge or a tunnel. It happens very quickly. And we can see that. In fact, Steve Roberts has done a lot of work around this latest crackdown on officials in China, and people taking bribes and doing the wrong thing, and being built into the process of slowing things down and not helping China develop. Those people are being either prosecuted or moved to the side, and we see that things are starting to speed up again in China. Whilst it's not going to be the heydays of a few years ago, we still see really significant growth there, and we see some of the obvious demographic moves as highly important for our stock selections.